All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Friday, the last day of term. Daniel looks pumped. Yeah, are you?
I finished everything.
You finished everything?
Yeah.
Well,
Weekend.
how nice for you. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, that's good. That's good time management.
No, weekend is beyond for reading other subjects.
Although I am, of course, not done everything because you've all got work to hand in to me in the next week, but that's okay. Yeah, this is the last day. So I'll say good morning to some people. Abby's here. Good morning, Abby. Simrat is here. Good morning, Simrat. Shania is here. Good morning, Shania. And Sarah's here. Good morning, Sarah. So let's finish off. Let me just close a couple of windows here so I can see what I'm supposed to be doing. I guess I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. Where were we? About here? Oh, yes. Right. So yesterday we were talking about, I guess I'll go to here, right, to Richard Wilkinson, right? And we said that Richard Wilkinson had done some he'd collected some data, he'd run some statistics on it, and this is kind of ultimately what he came up with, right? The idea that, I'm actually just going to move my head out of the way here. He came up with the idea that, in fact, it doesn't really matter how rich your country is once it's a rich country. So again, if you're talking about a very poor country, poor countries have difficulty with all of these things that you see on the left, and they have those problems because they lack infrastructure, because they lack health care, they lack education, and they need the money in order to provide those things for their citizens. So that's kind of a different story, right? That's a different thing. But what Richard Wilkinson is talking about is countries that actually have enough money to address these topics. And what he says is that indeed in societies where things are more unequal, you actually have more social problems, right? And again, he showed us different graphs, and the same pattern shows up for all of these things, right? The life expectancies go down. Kids' math and literacy scores go down. Their high school dropouts go up. Teenage births go up. Obesity and mental illness go up. Social mobility goes down, right? All of these things that we think are good for society actually seem to decrease the more unequal our society gets, right? And so again, you can see we've already seen data and statistics that show us that the US is probably the most economically unequal country on the planet, or at least amongst the rich market democracies. Poorer countries aren't in part of this, but in terms of rich market democracies, the US is the most unequal. And again, they have the most social problems in all of these categories, right? And so I'm just going to jump ahead to this. And so these are pretty big issues for a society, right? When you have significant health struggles, drug abuse, mental illness, when you have trouble with how people are relating to each other, so homicide, issues of trust. Wasn't that shocking, the difference between, like, if you ask someone in Sweden, and they asked people in Sweden, hey, do you think the average person can be trusted, right? The average person that you meet on the street, can they be trusted? Are they a good, normal person, right? And in Sweden, 65% of people say yes, right? Not every single person, right? But the Swedes think, yeah, most people can be trusted. Only 25% of Americans say that. So most Americans feel that you can't trust anybody else unless they're your friend, kind of thing. So that's a difference, right? That's going to change people's quality of life when they're walking down the street and they feel that they can't trust anybody, right? That everyone is a potential enemy, right? That's a stressor in itself, right? And again, Richard Wilkinson points out that there's a lot of lost human capital here, right? When kids are scoring low in school, when they're dropping out, when they're having kids too young, or when they're not ready for them. When they enter a society where there's low social mobility, right? The American dream tells you to, if you work hard, you can do anything, right? But if kids find out when they grow up that, oh, actually, it doesn't matter how hard I work, I'm never going to get anywhere, right? I'm never going to, I was born into poverty, I will never get out of it. So what's the point, right? Are those people going to work hard? Are they going to try to get out of their situation? No, it's going to be awful. It's going to be miserable for them, and it's going to be detrimental to society, right? And so, again, all of these things are negative outcomes, and they hurt the people affected, but they also hurt society as a whole, right? And that's kind of what Richard Wilkinson was trying to show us with this chart here, that just on one measure, infant mortality, it's true in Britain, as you move up the economic scale in Britain, the more rich and powerful you are, indeed, instances of infant mortality decrease. But even those people who are at the top of British society, who have the most money and power, they would actually do better living in a more equal society like Sweden, because Sweden has lower infant mortality all across the board, right? So again, if you're a poorer person or someone lower on the economic ladder, yeah, it's great to be in Sweden, right? But even if you're at the top, it's still great to be in Sweden, right? It's still great to be in a society that is more equal, right? And so Richard Wilkinson makes a suggestion here. I don't know how, I don't know if, you could probably have a bigger conversation about this, but one of the things he suggests is that this is a social evaluative threat thing, okay? So it's that people don't like to be negatively judged by others, right? And a lot of things that people fear or that stresses them out has to do with other people judging us, right? So people don't like public speaking. Would anyone here like to perform on stage? Maybe in a musical? Even a presentation in front of the class? Does anyone get stressed for presentations? Preet's fine, yes. That's good that you don't, but most people do, right? Most people don't like to be up in front of a bunch of people, right? And again, it's because humans are sensitive to social judgments. And actually that point brings us back to almost the beginning of this class when we talked about socialization, right? Society establishes social norms, and then when people don't follow them, we kind of punish them, right? We kind of don't talk to them, or we stand further away, or we say something. And we do that, good morning, we do that because humans are actually very sensitive to that. And so it's actually an effective means of social control to kind of judge people, right? Or to, shun them a little bit, or not talk to them if they're breaking the rules. And so, but here, Richard Wilkinson says that the fact that people are so unequal in some societies makes some people feel like they're being judged all the time, right? Like they're less than everyone else. And that's a stressor, right? That creates stress in people's bodies, and that constant stress can have negative social and emotional and physical health outcomes. Right? This is a bit of an aside, but some scientists will tell you that, yeah, chronic stress is really detrimental to the health of humans, right? Humans are, we have stress hormones, right? But our stress and our adrenaline system is made for short-term stress, right? So thousands of years ago, you're walking along and suddenly there's a cave bear, right? Pops out of nowhere. Of course, you get a massive shot of adrenaline, you freak out, and you run for it, right? And either the bear catches you and eats you, in which case your problems are over, or you get away, and then your problems are also over. And so the stress there is very short-lived, and it's very intense, but then it's over. Right? But a lot of people, some scientists will say, but the problem with modern society is that it creates low-level stress, So, none of us are, I think, in fear for our lives right now, or at least I hope not. But that stress doesn't kind of go away, right? So the bear is like, oh my God, the bear, and then it's over, right? But modern society is often, constant stress, constant stress, constant stress. And it's not high level stress, but it's just always there. And many people many scientists will say that our kind of stress hormone system, our physiology is not really built for that. And it's exhausting, right? We kind of get burnt out eventually if we're constantly stressed at a low level. Our bodies are not really designed to be stressed for long periods of time. They're meant to be stressed for very short periods of time so that we can run away or fight back, and then the stress needs to be over, right? But that's often not the way it works in modern society, and so there are negative outcomes to that. He suggests that we can fix this in a couple of different ways, right? We can try to constrain people's salaries. We can try to put some limits on those, but we can also tax people differently, right? And so countries like Sweden and Norway, the countries that we're actually doing pretty well on the graph, those countries are heavily taxing their more wealthy citizens, right? And so again, that creates less inequality, right? It pulls people at the top, it pulls people down at the top, and then that money gets injected into the bottom through social programs, right? So again, a perfect example is free university in countries like Sweden. And so again, if you're born into a poor family in the United States, you're probably not going to university, right? Because it's expensive and you can't afford it. But in a country like Sweden, you can, right? All you have to do is pass your entrance exams and you're in, right? And so it's much more based on ability rather than economic class.
All universities?
What's that?
All universities?
I'm not entirely sure, but I think the major ones, like if this was Sweden, you could go to UBC for free. If this was Sweden. Yeah. But again, the Swedes pay much higher taxes than Canadians do. And Canadians, I think, pay more taxes than the Americans do. So again, it's kind of a societal thing, right? Society has to say, this is the kind of equality we want, and we're willing to pay for it. And everyone does. But countries like the US, many Americans don't want that kind of country, and they don't want to pay for it. And so they don't.
As we talk in class, the indigenous people don't need to pay tax or pay tuition for education or university.
Mm-hmm.
I think government should treat poor people like indigenous people.
Well, that's the thing, right? Is that people at the bottom of the economic ladder need support, right? They need supports, and again, if you remember, that was this class. We talked about left wing and right wing, right? And again, people on the left are more open to that idea, right? Higher taxes, and those taxes fund social programs, right? Whether it's scholarships or whether it's income tax breaks or pensions or funding for this or funding for that, a universal basic income, all of those things are kind of left-wing ideas, right? And so again, the countries like Canada are more open to that, because I think on average we do lean a little, I guess this is the left for you guys, they do lean a little to the left, but for countries like the US it's much harder because the US leans a little more to the right than that.
In Sweden, is democratic as well?
Is it what?
Democratic?
Yeah.
And everyone agrees that universities should be free. Not like that.
Probably.
With left and right. Yeah.
Probably not. I don't know for sure. Like I'm not fluent in the political landscape of Sweden. I suspect not everyone agrees. And again, in a democracy, this is an important point actually, democracies aren't about everyone agreeing, right? Democracy is about everyone getting to have their say, right? So again, in a democracy, everyone gets to have an opinion, everyone gets to express that opinion, And in theory, everyone gets to vote, right? So everyone has a stake in the decision-making process. But it doesn't mean that everyone gets their way, right? It means that the majority vote is what the decision is. And some people have to, in a democracy, if you don't get your way, you have to be okay with that, right? And a few months ago, Donald Trump showed us how not to do that, because, again, democracy only works if you lose the election, if you say, you know what, the people have spoken, I will step down, this has been the honor of my life to serve as president, good luck to you all, congratulations to President-elect Biden, right? That's how democracy works. Even if you don't get your way, you have to go along with what the group has decided, right? But of course, Donald Trump doesn't do that, and he says the election was rigged and it was stolen and blah, 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 blah. But yeah, so does everyone agree? Probably not, but enough people agree that it can happen. You would have a much harder time doing something like that in a country like the United States, because a bigger proportion of them don't think that's fair. They think if you want to go to university, then get a job and earn money and go to university. Even if you work a low-paying job and you will never save enough money for that. But do it anyway, right? Is some Americans' perspective. So, yeah, right. So some things can be done to address this. Richard Wilkinson suggests them, and maybe we can go. I'm gonna skip to my other summary here, because I have a summary that more kind of fully, it summarizes classism, but it also summarizes some of the other things that we've talked about as well. So before I move on, are there any other classism questions or issues you wanted to talk about or ask about?
The government,
Well,
social equality.
I mean, they're kind of doing what they have always done, and so, we do have social programs like welfare. We do have unemployment insurance. We do have disability pensions for people who can't work because of a disability. There's lots of nonprofit organizations which try to help people who are disadvantaged or poor or struggling for whatever reason. There are lots of government supports and non-governmental organizations that are involved in doing that. And so, I wouldn't say nothing is being done, because things are being done, money is being spent, supports are in place. But also, we have to, we can pat ourselves on the back for doing some things. But also, if you go down, if you take a walk 20 minutes that way, and I don't necessarily recommend that you do, but if you walk about 20 minutes or 25 minutes that way, you will see a lot of homeless, desperate, poor people struggling with physical illnesses or injuries or mental health illnesses, drug and alcohol addictions. You will find all of that. And so the question maybe for society is that even though we're spending that money and we have those supports, somehow we're not helping those people, right? Those people are still living in, a bunch of tents in a park. And so, the question we should say is that, clearly our approach is not working for these people. Why not, right? What are we doing wrong? Why do we still have a bunch of homeless people living in tents in a park over that way? And how you answer that question has a lot to do with your background, your education, your socialization, where you sit on that political spectrum. Yeah, but it's a question that society has to answer, right? Why are those people there? I doubt they want to be, right? They're not there because they want to be. So why are they there? Is it their fault because they're lazy or stupid or, can't be bothered to get a job? Is it something that we've done wrong as a society? Is there something wrong with the way that Canada works that needs to be fixed or rectified? Yeah, so the way you answer that question has a lot to do with your own beliefs and ideologies, right, and how you see the world. But it's certainly a complex question because, people have been homeless in Canada and the US for decades. And I suspect they will be homeless for decades. And so, again, it's been a question that society has struggled to answer for one way or another. It's a complicated question for sure. But again, our ideologies and the way we see the world also gets in the way, right? So again, if you see those people as there just because they're, it's their own fault that they're living in a tent in a park, well then you don't have to do anything, right? Because it's their problem, it's their job to fix it. But if you believe that we have a role to play here as well, well then we have to look at what can and should we do in order to assist these people, right? Is the universal basic income an answer, right? Does it work? Do we need more money in our social programs? Do we need different social programs? Do we need to make those programs more accessible because those people, even though the programs might be there and running and the money might be flowing, maybe for some reason they can't access them for some reason, right? Maybe it's an access problem. All of these things we have to figure out. But again, it depends on how you see the world, right? Okay. Last thing. One of the things that I would kind of like to drive home to you here, and this is kind of the upshot of Richard Wilkinson's TED Talk there, is that inequality hurts everyone, right? And Richard Wilkinson, I think, if you agree with his argument, I think he was able to demonstrate that to us. Even if you are at the top of society, right? Even if you are an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos, the fact that things are so unequal in your country actually has negative effects on people across the spectrum, right? And again, that's true of economic inequality, but I suspect that it's also true of all of the other types of oppression we've talked about in this course as well, right? We said that in all of these, when we talked about sexism and racism and ableism and all of these things, that there's a dominant group and a minoritized group, and the dominant group is able to secure resources and opportunities that the minoritized group doesn't have. The dominant group is able to impose their prejudices on society. They're able to create society in a way that works for them. And all those things are still true, but it doesn't mean that people in the dominant group aren't harmed by what's going on in society as well, right? It is possible that people can create a society that advantages them, but ultimately disadvantages everyone in the process. Does that make sense? Yeah, and again, we can see these inequalities through really broad societal level statistics, right? And so there's lots of individual stories out there, and one of the things I think I pointed out was the murder of George Floyd, right? And so the murder of George Floyd is awful, and people were outraged and should have been outraged, and it does shine a light on a problem of systemic racism in the United States. But it doesn't necessarily prove that it exists, right? Because it is one instance, right? It's one instance of police violence against this man, right? And so George Floyd's murder doesn't prove that you have systemic racism in the US, but it is a symptom of it, right? It is connected to a larger picture. And so again, we have to pay attention to people like George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery. We have to pay attention to those cases because, again, they are symptomatic and they grab the public's attention and they make people upset, right? Statistics are kind of hard to get upset about, right? When you see numbers and graphs most people find it difficult to get upset about a graph. But when they see footage of a man being murdered by a police officer, people have an emotional reaction to that. And so, you know, it's good for us to pay attention to those things, and it's good for us to be outraged. But again, there's a bigger picture that we need to consider. And that's kind of what I'm pointing you at in this class, is that yes, we have these individual crimes going on, and they need to be paid attention to, and we need to be rightly outraged. But there's also these broad level things that are more difficult to see, and sometimes more difficult to be upset about, right? But again, if we go back to the sexism unit, gosh, what was the statistic? I forget what the statistic was about women who had experienced sexual harassment or sexual assault, but it was a shockingly high number, right? And again, numbers are more difficult to get upset about, but it's outrageous, right? The degree to which women are suffering sexual assaults. And you know, one of the things that came up, it was an Instagram post this week, but you know, if even in the statistic, think of the statistic. So does anyone remember the number of women who had experienced, I'm gonna look it up, hang on, we need to do this. We need to do this. So I'm gonna look it up. It's in sexism, and I think it's in one of the last sexism ones. Here it is. Here we go. So I said that a full half of all women in Canada have experienced at least one incident of physical or sexual violence by the age of 16. Remember me saying that? Remember me saying that? Okay. So, and actually, whoops. Okay. I said that half of all women in Canada have experienced at least one incident of physical or sexual violence since the age of 16. But what some people have pointed out is that there's even some gender bias in that statistic. Because the question is, why do we phrase it that way? Why don't we say that men have physically or sexually assaulted half of women in Canada? Why don't we say it that way? That's totally different though, isn't it? Yeah, the way we normally, and you know what, maybe I'll put this on the screen here, hang on. I'm gonna put it on the screen. Sorry, I know that's kind of small. Let me see if I can just make it a little bit bigger. Yeah, so why do we phrase things this way, right? When we phrase it this way, that half of all women have experienced at least one incident, there's no perpetrator, right? They've experienced it, but who's doing it? Well, yeah, but the statistic, the way we phrased it, doesn't say anything at all, right? It just says they've experienced it, like it just happened, you know, randomly. Or, you know, we don't know who did it, but somehow they experienced this, right? But we know who did it, right? In almost all cases, and of course, women can physically or sexually assault other women as well, that does happen. But by and large, it's men that are doing it, right? And so again, why don't we phrase this in such a way that men have physically or sexually assaulted half of the women in Canada by the time they're the age of 16? Why don't we say it that way? That hits a little harder, doesn't it? Yeah, but so even in the statistic itself, there is evidence of gender bias, right? There's evidence in how we present this is that yes, this thing happened to women, isn't this terrible? But we're still not pointing the finger at men, right? So that was a bit of an aside, but let me go back. And actually, I don't know how we got there. again, why do we see inequality in society? Well, societies are composed of social institutions, right? And we talked about families and education and healthcare and the government and the criminal justice system and the media, religion. All of these things function to reproduce society as it is. And usually they are controlled by the dominant group. And so the dominant group can continue to perpetuate inequalities, right? It can continue to reproduce society the way it already is, with all of its inequality baked in. Right? And again, this is why it's difficult to make changes sometimes, because again, these social institutions are controlled by the dominant group, and these social institutions serve to reproduce society as it already is. Right? So when you get a little bit older, and maybe you have kids of your own, to be honest, you know, unless you had a horrible childhood, and I'm sorry if you did, but unless you had a horrible childhood, you're probably going to raise your kids in a very similar way to the way your parents raised you, right? You'll probably make some changes, right? You'll think, oh God, I hated it when my mom did that, or my dad did this, so I'm not going to do that. But you're probably going to reproduce a lot of the same things that happened to you when you were a kid, right? The same thing with education, right? Here we are in school, and in Social Studies 11, usually, I teach students about Canadian democracy and how the democratic system works and how bills are passed and how elections happen and all that stuff. I teach them that because that's what the government wants you to know, right? I don't teach you how to be good communists, right? The government doesn't want you to have a communist revolution and turn Canada into a communist country. It's not what the government wants. The government wants good democratic citizens. So that's what we teach you to be, right? And so again, these social institutions are important to the functioning of society, but for the most part, they're not interested in social change. For the most part, they're interested in maintaining the way things already are, right? And so sometimes it can be difficult to make changes within social institutions because of how they function, but also who is in control of them. Does that make sense, Nicholas? You looked a little... You okay? Okay. Again, why are dominant groups in control of social institutions? Well, mostly because of historical processes. So if you look at the development of agriculture, has something to do with sexism, colonialism, civil wars, coups, institutionalized religion. All of these things have kind of a long history, and they help to explain why some groups are in the dominant role and some are in a minoritized role. And of course, it depends on where you go as well, right? So again, here in North America, white Europeans are the dominant group, but if you go to China, obviously we are not, right? Chinese people are the dominant group in China. So it partially depends on where you are, it partially depends on the history of that particular area, and you know, part of it has to do with either some individual historical events or some kind of more broad trends, like again, the development of agriculture or colonialism. Those have important effects on why certain groups wind up with power and why other ones do not. How are dominant groups benefited by their control of social institutions? Well, again, they're able to reserve certain rights and freedoms and opportunities for themselves, and they're able to deny them to others, right? And so we can see that in Quebec, right? We talked about that religious symbols law. And so is that law going to benefit white French Quebecers? Yeah, right? It's going to be just as easy, if not easier, for them to get jobs in government or access government services, because people who are different, people who display religious symbols, visible minorities, they're going to have to assimilate or they're going to have to get out, right? And again, we heard in the article that when we heard the experiences of those 6 women, some of them were going to get out, right? Some of them were going to move to other provinces or other countries because, again, they felt like there was no place for them in Quebec. And they may be right, but once they leave, it will open more opportunities for white French Quebecers, right? And so the dominant group will be benefited by that law, right? And minoritized groups will have to assimilate, right? Will have to give up their religious beliefs or parts of their culture, or they'll have to go somewhere where they will be accepted and where they will be welcomed. Dominant groups also benefit by being able to define what's normal, right? And so they're not necessarily seen through any kind of lens. And we talked about that with the resumes. If you remember back to the University of Chicago study where they sent out the resumes with the sort of black sounding names and the white sounding names. All dominant groups benefit from this. And so again, they're not seen as representatives of their group, they're just seen as individuals. And again, you can see this whenever we have an incidence of mass violence in the United States. If it's a white person, he gets treated as an individual. And I say he because it's always a he, right? But, you know, a white guy goes in and shoots up, you know, a school or a massage parlor or whatever, and people ask, oh, I wonder what was going on with this guy. The sheriff, who I think arrested him, described it, oh, he was just having a really bad day. I swear to you, he said this. He said, oh, he must have been having a really bad day. Yeah, imagine the 6 women he shot. I think they're having a worse day now because they're dead. Sorry, that was a little trite. But you know what I'm saying? Like, people look at this guy as an individual, right? But had he been a person of color, had he been a Muslim or even perceived by people as a Muslim, suddenly that identity would have taken precedence, right? And so it would have been, the shooting would have been all about religion, right? It would have been all about a jihad kind of thing. It wouldn't have been, oh, I guess this guy just had a really bad day, right? Nobody would have said that. They would have seen him through the lens of his religion or his race or his ethnicity. And so again, in, you know, more everyday contexts like getting hired for a job, or more extreme contexts like committing a mass murder, people in the dominant group aren't seen through any kind of lens. They're seen as individuals. People in the minoritized group are always seen as representatives of their group. And again, I'm not saying that that's right. I'm not saying that that's desirable. I'm saying that's often the way it works. Again, we said dominant groups can impose their prejudices on society. Where do those prejudices come from? Well, they come from stereotype, right? And they come from oversimplifications of groups, right? So some of these prejudices have a historical precedent, right? And so lots of people are still anti-Semitic, so they are prejudiced against Jewish people. There's a long history of that. Anti-Semitism goes back hundreds of years in Europe. It's not a new thing. Islamophobia, which I don't like the word, but people use it. Islamophobia is another one that has a historical precedent, right? So, certainly the Middle East has been the site of a lot of warfare and conflict, but certainly 9/11, where that sort of violence and terrorism kind of found its way into the heart of America, that was a traumatic experience for a lot of Americans. And so again, it still fuels some of their prejudices. And again, I'm not saying right or wrong or justified or not, but I think that part of that prejudice against Muslims can be connected to that event, right? Misogyny, homophobia, all of these go back, tens if not hundreds of years. Some of them have religious elements to them. But these stereotypes are kind of, in many cases, quite old. And they, once we attach positive and negative values to them, dominant groups start to enforce them on society, right? And again, how do we pick up our stereotypes? Well, we pick them up through socialization, right? That's where they come from, right? We all know the stereotype that Asian people are really good at math, or that are really smart. And I don't even know, can anyone, I think we know that stereotype. Can anyone think about where they learned that from? Did your parents sit you down one day and say, Daniel, one of the things that you should know in life is that Asians are really good at math? Did anyone ever teach you that? No, you just absorbed it, right? We all know the stereotype, right? We know how it is. When we watched that documentary, Eighth Fire, on Indigenous people, they talked about a bunch of stereotypes that are associated with Indigenous people. How did we all come to know those? I don't know. What's that? Yeah, so sometimes they come from movies, sometimes they come from television, from the news, sometimes it comes from other people talking, sometimes we see things and it gets kind of worked into our brain somehow. Either way, we're all part of a socialization process, right? It happened to us when we were young, right? Our parents and grandparents and other people who cared for us worked hard to socialize us, to teach us the rules of society. And then we continue to absorb things, right? And we're constantly being socialized. We're constantly absorbing new information, communicating it to others, following social norms and social rules, punishing others when they break the rules, trying to get them to follow the rules again. We're all part of this process all the time, right? And so, that's kind of where they come from. Many of these stereotypes and prejudices we absorb, implicitly. So things are taught in society, but not in a direct manner. Go back to that statistic I talked to you about a few minutes ago about sexism. So my critique of that statistic was that there's no perpetrator in that statistic, right? Women experience sexual violence. Great, but where does it come from, right? Who's doing it, right? And it's men that are doing it. But men, the way the statistic is phrased, it lets them off the hook, right? It's like somehow it happens, but it's nobody's fault, right? That's almost what it sounds like in the statistic, rather than saying men are the ones who are physically and sexually assaulting women. Half of women in Canada before they're 16.
It's not because if they're like men assaulting women, there is also sexism.
Say that one more time.
If they're like men, there is also sexism, because they don't want to treat all men.
It's true, right? Like they definitely, you wouldn't want to say that. You wouldn't want to say that, oh, it's all men doing this, when in fact it's not. But I think if you probably looked at the statistics, you would find that it's like 95%. I think it's fair to say that it's mostly men, by a large margin. And in fact, if it was anywhere less than 90%, I would be shocked. Very shocked. In fact, if it's less than 95%, I'd still be pretty shocked. So it is all men. Women are not sexually or physically assaulting other women in any significant numbers. Does it happen? Sure it does. Does it happen in any kind of quantity? I doubt it. And so, again, but that's an implicit thing, right? We read the statistic and we're like, oh gosh, that's really horrible. But again, think about what's happening in your subconscious, right? That statistic is saying, well, it's nobody's fault. We don't know who did it. It's just happening, right? And men are let off the hook, right? Just yesterday, the president or prime minister, I think it's the prime minister. No, maybe it's the president. The president of Pakistan said on camera or on record that, if if we want to decrease the number of rapes and sexual assaults in Pakistan, women have to wear more modest clothing. Because, otherwise, when they don't, when there's vulgarity, is what he said, then, men don't have that much willpower. So, women have to, cover themselves in order to make sure that they are not raped. And that's the exact same sentiment as that statistic has. It's just explicit. He's coming right out and saying it, right? He's saying that women get sexually assaulted and raped, and it's their fault, right? If they behaved correctly or if they dressed correctly, then that wouldn't happen, right? It's not men's fault. Men don't have any willpower, right? That's what he's saying. And again, most of us are having a reaction to that and saying, that's nuts. What are you talking about? Which I think a good chunk of the world is having that reaction. But does that statistic, and go back to it, there we go, does that statistic say the same thing? Just in a more subtle manner. That yes, women experienced sexual assault and violence, but men are not to blame. Again, it's not the same. The statement from Pakistan's president is much more hard-hitting, and it's in your face, and it's like, oh my God, what are you talking about? But is that same idea not hidden in that statistic? Is it not communicated that this thing happens to women, but men are not implicated? Men are not at fault? Men are not the perpetrators here? Maybe, maybe not. I'll leave that for you to decide. So what do we do? Right? What do we do about all this? Well, again, remember that one of the things we said at the beginning was that knowledge was socially constructed, right? And socially constructed means that the reality that us humans live in has a lot to do with what we believe to be true. If things are believed to be true, they are. Is gold a valuable material? Yeah. How much does it cost per ounce? Like $1,000 per ounce or something like that? Ridiculous, right? Why is it so expensive? What? It's not that rare. It's not that rare. We people like to convince us that it's rare. It's not really that rare. Why does it have value? Because it's shiny? It's what? Yeah, people make it valuable because they say it's valuable, right? Why is gold expensive? Because everyone thinks it has value, and so it does, right? As a metal, it's not that big of a deal, right? Is it pretty? Yeah, kind of. It doesn't tarnish very easily, which is nice, right? It stays shiny, which is a nice feature. Is it very useful for a lot of things? Not so much. It's actually a really soft metal. And so, ancient people, making swords and shields and things like that, they didn't care about gold. Gold's not strong enough to do any of those things. If you go into battle with a gold sword, you're going to die because the guy with the iron sword is going to cut it in half and cut your head off, right? So gold's not a really useful metal, but it sure is pretty, and so people give it value, and so it has value. But really, it doesn't have to, right? There's nothing intrinsically valuable about gold. You don't need it to live, right? If we all needed to eat 5 grams of gold a day in order to live, it would have value, right? We would need it every single day. That's not the way it is. We don't really need it at all, but we just have agreed that it's valuable, and so it is. And so, again, since we can agree on different things being true, how can we reconstruct our knowledge, right? If things are socially constructed, how do we reconstruct what we know? If we have prejudice and discrimination in society, and we have those things because of the socially constructed knowledge that people have, how do we reconstruct what people know? And I think that brings us back to these things, and they're kind of, they're habits of habits of mind, habits of thought, ways of looking at things. And so, again, what I told you at the beginning of the course was we should strive for intellectual humility, right? So admit, you don't have to admit to anyone else, but you can at least admit to yourself, you don't know everything. And in fact, in the grand scheme of things, you know nothing. And neither do I. Right? There's a lot of knowledge and information out there and different perspectives. A lot of the things that we think we understand, we really don't. And so, recognize the fact that your knowledge is not bulletproof, and really no one else's is either, right? We have to be open to the fact that we might be wrong about things. Number 2, I said recognize the difference between informed knowledge and broader social patterns. Nope, informed knowledge and opinion. Sorry about that, I read parts of 2 different lines. Informed knowledge and opinion, right? Opinions are things that people don't back up with evidence, right? And so everybody has opinions. Everyone has things that they think. It's fine to have opinions and things that you think, but just because someone has an opinion doesn't mean you have to believe it, right? And if you're being a good critical thinker, people should be able to give you reasons why they believe what they believe, right? And those reasons should logically support their conclusion, and they should be true, and we should be able to back them up with evidence. If you can't do any of that, you just have an opinion, and opinions aren't very rigorous, right? The best flavor of ice cream is chocolate. I have no evidence to prove that. I'm just saying that's what it is. And you can, you can agree with me, or you can say, no, Mike, you're crazy. Chocolate ice cream is not the best. But either way, there's not anything we can think critically about. And with, big things in society, we should be thinking critically. We shouldn't be, simply absorbing people's opinions just because, right? Again, pay attention to broader social patterns. It's very easy to pay attention to these sort of fantastic, dramatic instances in the news, right, where something happens to someone, and again, George Floyd is an example of this. Those things are worthy of attention and worthy of outrage, but what we want to look at is broader social patterns, right? We want to look at what's going on in society. What are the statistics? Who is being disadvantaged, and why is that? Notice when you're having kind of an emotional reaction to something, whether it's something someone says or something that you read, and think about why you are upset, right? And so, if you read a statistic, like this, where half of women in Canada have experienced or men have perpetrated sexual or physical assaults on half of all Canadian women, that makes me upset, right? That is completely unacceptable, right? In a society like Canada, to have a statistic like that, unacceptable, right? And so I can have an emotional reaction to that, and I know why I'm having the reaction, because people should not be physically or sexually assaulted in any case. And it certainly shouldn't happen to one gender more often than the other, right? But it does. It's almost exclusively women. Perpetrators are almost exclusively men, right? So we have a big problem, and that problem is gender-based, right? And we need to fix that. But what I'm talking about here is that, again, when you want to push back against an idea and you're having a bit of an emotional reaction, pay attention to why you're having it, right? So me with the statistic, I know why I'm having it, because my belief is that we shouldn't have these things, and yet we do, right?
What if emotional behavior reaction gets too strong and you start expressing anger in a destructive way?
Well, I think that is, you have to be in control of your behavior, right? You can feel as you want. And in fact, feelings are feelings are something that occur and they're not entirely within our control, right? So sometimes you're going to feel sad or happy or upset, and we can't necessarily control how we feel. Certainly I'd like to feel happy all of the time, right? That would be just fantastic. But I can't do that, right? Because I'm not really in control of my emotions to that degree. And so you're always going to feel things, but your behavior is something else, right? You don't have the right to, take that anger out on other people, right? That's where you have to be able to moderate your behavior. You can feel as you want. It's almost like a discrimination thing, right? You can believe what you want, but don't discriminate. You can feel as you feel, and your feelings are valid, but how you behave based on those feelings is different, right? And so you have to be able to behave in such a way that is appropriate and doesn't injure others. Right. So when you're having an emotional reaction, that's a good time to question your beliefs, right? Why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? What piece of my socialization is this new information bumping into? And do I need to reevaluate that piece of my socialization? Sometimes you won't have to, right? So again, with this statistic here, yeah, I'm upset about that. I don't like it, but I don't think there's anything I need to reevaluate, right? Because my belief is that people shouldn't be physically or sexually assaulted at all. I'm firm in that belief. I don't need to think about that. But there might be other beliefs that we do need to look at and say, yeah, why am I upset about this? Why do I feel defensive about this? Why do I feel like I need to reject this piece of information? And again, you might need to reject it, right? Your beliefs might be sound. On the other hand, they might not be, because a lot of the beliefs that we have, we've kind of just absorbed through socialization, and we haven't really critically thought about them, right? And so comparative cultures, it's like Socrates says, right? An unexamined life is a life not worth living, right? And so Socrates is saying that very thing. He's saying, pay attention to your beliefs and examine them and make sure that they are worthy of believing. And if they're not, stop believing them. Get rid of them, right? And finally, I said that we should recognize how our own social positionality informs our perspectives and relates to what happens in class and in life. So again, we want to see people as individuals and treat people as individuals, but we also need to be aware of the social groups that we belong to and that others belong to as well, right? And so here, in this class, I'm teaching a class on social justice, right? At least that's what I've been trying to do. Is that what I'm doing? That's what I've been trying to do. But at the same time, I'm a member of just about every dominant group, right? I'm white, I'm male, I'm a Canadian citizen, I'm a heterosexual, I'm not Christian, but I come from a Christian background, so I kind of have that mentality. I'm not a wealthy person, so I'm not a member of that dominant group, but I'm a member of pretty much every other one. And so in that respect, there are things that I can say in here and things that I can't because of who I am, right? And in fact, maybe a white male is not a perfect instructor for this course, right? Maybe a woman of color would be a much better choice, right? Maybe someone who's in a minoritized group could speak to some of these issues with a perspective and with an authority that I cannot do. Maybe. I don't know. But the fact that I am who I am definitely causes, I definitely pay attention to it in the way that I talk about things and the way that I present information. Because, yeah, I'm paying attention to the fact that it's coming from a white man. And so I have to be careful about some of the things that I say in order to communicate things effectively. Does that make sense? A little bit? Yeah. So again, pay attention to those dynamics. Pay attention to who talks and who doesn't talk. maybe not in this class, but in other classes in the future or in classes in the past, who spoke more, men or women in the class, or boys and girls? Think about it. Often you'll find that boys are the ones who speak up first, girls are more reluctant to, right? I remember having a discussion in a social justice class a couple years ago, and we were talking about something to do with women's rights, and it might have been the abortion thing about women's reproductive rights, and everybody who was talking about it and expressing an opinion was a male student. And there was nothing wrong with that, but it was very interesting that this topic that had to do with women and women's bodies was entirely being discussed by men. And so, again, there's nothing to necessarily freak out about in a lot of cases, but I just encourage you to pay attention to things. Pay attention to who talks and who doesn't. Pay attention to who has a voice and who doesn't. Pay attention to those dynamics. Okay. And again, if we can do all these things, and maybe if society can do all these things, then maybe we can move closer to something that represents a just, equitable society. And again, I don't know what that looks like. That's something that people have to discuss and talk about and create on their own. And so, this is the humility part. I don't have all the answers to this. But through doing those things, through talking, noticing our emotional reactions, being intellectually humble, recognizing the difference between informed knowledge and opinion, looking at broad social patterns, by doing all of those things and talking about them, then I think we can kind of move in the right direction. Because no matter what kind of oppression you're talking about, sexism, racism, religious oppression, whatever it is, I hope that you've noticed that they all kind of work the same, right? They all are built on prejudice and stereotype. Those stereotypes are often not true. The prejudicial ideas are unfounded, and dominant groups use them to retain control and power that they already have. And again, the only thing that really changes, if you're talking about racism and sexism, the only thing that changes is who is the dominant and minoritized group and what the kind of prejudicial ideas that are being used to maintain power, right? If you open the hood of all of these types of oppression, the engine running underneath them is the same, right? It's just the ideas that are different. It's just the social groups that are different. But oppression always works the same way. And so while it's difficult to talk about and it's difficult to change, in some ways it's not difficult to understand at the base level. And again, it's not difficult because they all operate the same way, right? Just the details are changing. It's the same plot, right? And again, I think we need to move in this direction because, again, like Richard Wilkinson told us, sorry, I need 2 more slides here, because this is what we're aiming for, right? In a society that is socially just, right? We're wanting to move toward a society where everyone has equitable access to the same resources, right? So if you want to go to university and you have the marks, if you have the ability to succeed in university, you should be able to go to university, right? It shouldn't be, you shouldn't have to come from a rich family to do that, right? But, if you are a woman, you should be able to walk down the street without fearing for your life or fearing the fact that you're going to be sexually assaulted, right? That is something that everyone should be able to do. And so, again, if we are moving in the right direction, we're creating a society where everyone has equitable rights and resources. We will embrace human rights and the equal worth of all citizens, right? And all citizens to kind of acquire the things that they need. Again, regardless of their gender, their race, their sexuality, their religious beliefs or expression, their ability, everyone will be able to meet their needs in an equitable fashion. And again, in places where we do have inequalities, we reduce them as much as possible, right? And so, again, we're always going to have some degree of inequality. We're all different, right? We're all unique individuals. Some of us are going to be really good and really successful at things, and some of us are not going to be successful at other things. But we're always going to have a little bit of inequality, but we should reduce those things wherever we can, right? Because, again, inequality hurts everyone, right? Everyone in society is affected. It's not just the minoritized group. It's not just the people at the bottom. It's even the people at the top. And so wherever your positionality is, wherever you kind of sit in society according to your group identities, you can be sure that the inequitability is hurting you somehow. And again, even if you don't care about the people at the bottom, even if you don't care about minoritized groups, you can at least care about yourself, right? And you can see that everyone is affected by this. And so there should be motivation for anyone, wherever they sit in society, to want to rectify this. And again, we can do it, right? These things can be fixed, they can be changed. It just takes a lot of work. Okay, I think that is my last slide. That's all I have. I don't think I have any. No, I don't have any more social justice for you. In my pockets, none under there. There's no social justice in here. No, I think that's all the social justice I have. So that is it. Thank you for being part of this class. I hope it was educational. I hope you learned something. I hope you will take something out of this course that maybe will be helpful to you in the future. I don't know if it will. Sometimes that doesn't happen, but I hope so. As a quick reminder, papers are due on the 15th. If you can get it in earlier, please do. It'll make it easier for me to mark and get comments back and calculate marks. But you have until the 15th at midnight to get it into me, and then I suppose I will be on a marathon of marking until Monday morning when I have to submit your grades. So, any last questions before I shut this down?
In an equal society, there's someone running in the opposite direction. What should we do?
In equal society, if someone's what?
Someone's like running the opposite direction, which is like not following the rules.
Oh. Well, it's tricky, right? The best thing you can do is have conversations with people, raise awareness, and try to make changes where you're able to, right? So you are not going to be able to change everyone's mind. You're not going to be able to make people, make everyone do what you want them to do. Part of changing socially constructed knowledge is getting society to change it, right? And the only way that happens is to spread awareness, right? To educate, to talk, to make sure people know what's going on. And again, we've probably never been in a situation where that's been more easy to do, right? With, the fact that social media has connected all of us through, I know nobody uses Facebook anymore, but Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, platforms like this, it's never really been easier to get the message out, right? It's never been easier to communicate with huge numbers of people and influence them. And so, again, you can ask yourself, what are you putting out there, right? What can you do to raise awareness about inequalities in society, right? Even if it's just as simple as, posting things to your Instagram or, posting things to your stories so that other people can see it, right? That's a pretty easy thing to do, but it does move things in the right direction, right? It gets people talking about these issues and learning about situations in which people are struggling with discrimination or prejudice or inequality or outright genocide, right? Which again is still happening. And so if you post those things, you're getting them out into the public. People are seeing them, talking about them, sharing them with other people, and it moves things in the right direction. So we can't necessarily, we can't control or sorry, we can't control what individual people do. You can try, I suppose, but it doesn't really work very well. But you can talk to people, you can get those ideas out there, and you can influence people that way, right? Even if they just see your Instagram story that talks about an article you read on discrimination, and then one of your friends says to another friend, "Hey, I was just reading this on Daniel's feed, blah blah blah. What do you think about that?" Right? And that's kind of all it takes, right? Is people having these conversations, talking to each other, agreeing on what should and shouldn't be, and what is, what's right and ethical and equal and what's not. And that's how we sort of start moving the needle the other way. And it can work that way, and it can be just that simple. And again, we've never really been in a period of history where that's been easier to do, right? 40 years ago would have been real difficult, right? Now you have unprecedented reach, right? In theory, I can reach almost everyone on the planet with this thing. Not really, because nobody follows my accounts. But in theory, I can reach everybody, right? And so if that's true, what do I want to say to them, right? What kind of things do I want to put in front of people and say, hey, look at this, pay attention to this, talk about this, right? This is wrong, something needs to be done. In some ways it's real easy, right? We have difficult problems to solve, we have pretty significant inequality, but we've never had the ability to connect with each other to the degree that we do now. And so, yeah, in some ways it's, in some ways change can be quite simple. And again, imagine if the ban on religious symbols in Quebec, imagine if everyone in Canada posted on their Instagram, their Twitter, their TikTok, their Facebook, whatever other platforms they're on. What if they all, on May 1st, tweeted, posted, and said, we strongly disagree with this law. We think it is discriminatory and oppressive and racist, and we want this law recalled. What if everyone in Canada did that on the same day? 36 million people flooding the airways with this one thing. Do you think people would notice?
Yes.
Do you think people would start talking about it? Yeah. Do you think it might even get repealed? Hard to know. But imagine what could be done with everyone standing up at the same time and saying, enough's enough, right? We don't want this, get rid of it. Okay, any other questions?
I have a question. Attendance and participation in class has 10% of final grade. I
Yep.
just want to know, you already added that 10% in our grade, or
No, not yet. I'm going to. I just got to do the calculation.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions, queries?
Will this help me in the new world?
Well, I hope so. I hope it will. I don't know for sure. I can't see the future, but I hope so.
And we've been battling the kind of like inequality for years. Why haven't we succeeded so far?
Why haven't we what?
Succeeded.
Why haven't we succeeded? Well, probably the simple answer to that is that it is, in some ways, the problems are very complex. They are tangled up in society and culture and law, and untangling those things takes a lot of work and time. The other thing is that people who when people have power, they don't want to lose it, right? Once they have power and opportunity and resources, it's really hard for them to give it up. And that's true of any situation where anyone has power. Nobody wants to give up any of it. And so dominant groups who control social institutions don't want to give up power. They don't want to make room for anyone else. And it doesn't matter if those other people are women or ethnic or racial minorities or immigrants or whoever the group is, it doesn't matter. People do not like to give up their power, and it's hard to get them to do it. Good? Okay, that is it. You can pack it up. I hope you have a nice afternoon and weekend and exam week. I don't envy you during exams, but good luck anyway. Don't forget to submit me your final papers. And yeah, that's it. That's all I have. Abby, you're welcome.
One last question.
Sure.
Where's quiz 4 and the micro paper 2?
What's that?
Where's quiz 4 and the micro paper 2 feedback?
I sent it to your. I sent you a Teams message. It's in Microsoft Teams. Okay. That's it, people. See you around. Thanks for being part of this class. Online people, thank you too. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much.
Bye. You're welcome.